a powerful mafia boss, a struggling single mother, a single dinner, and a fateful decision that would irrevocably alter 4 lives forever. But what transpired next no one, absolutely no one, could have possibly foreseen. Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you for joining me tonight. I truly mean that. Tonight, I invite you to step into a world where the brutal shadow of danger encroaches upon the soft glow of hope. A world where the quiet resilience of one woman unexpectedly captures the attention of a man universally feared. A world where one pivotal moment in a high-end restaurant reshapes 4 destinies. If you appreciate heartfelt narratives interwoven with palpable suspense, please consider subscribing. But for now, settle in, for what unfolds will linger in your thoughts long after the final word. Let us begin. The massive, carved oak doors of Luminoso swung inward at precisely 7:15 on a bustling Friday evening, and the very air within the opulent restaurant seemed to thicken. The ambient chatter instantly muted as if someone had abruptly siphoned away the oxygen. William Edwards stepped across the threshold, his immense hand completely swallowing the small, trusting grip of his 6-year-old son, David. Within mere seconds, every conversation in the grand dining room dwindled into hushed, furtive whispers. This was no ordinary entrance, and William Edward was no ordinary patron. Not when the man now commanding the room had his formidable face plastered across the front page of the New York Times just 3 days prior, emblazoned beside the ominous headline, "Federal investigation intensifies into Edward crime syndicate." His security detail, 2 hulking men whose tailored suits did little to conceal their refrigerator-like builds, had already meticulously swept through the entrance. Their eyes, cold and assessing, ceaselessly scanned every velvet-draped corner, every face, every potential shadow of a threat lurking within the meticulously curated space. William moved with an almost predatory grace, a confidence born from the absolute certainty that he owned not merely this lavish restaurant, but half the entire city block it occupied, and quite possibly, the very souls of the people now frozen in their seats. Yet, if one looked closely, truly closely, a different narrative unfolded in the tight, desperate way David clutched his father's hand. The boy wasn't walking with the pride or casual confidence one might expect of a child in such a powerful man's wake. No, he clung to William like someone teetering on the edge of a precipice, terrified of falling. His eyes, wide with a mixture of apprehension and wonder, darted nervously from the stoic, armed guards to the openly staring patrons. His small body pressed so tightly against his father's leg that he was virtually camouflaged behind the rich, expensive Italian wool of William's bespoke suit. This evening was ostensibly a father-son dinner, one of those exceedingly rare occasions when William could attempt to embody the role of a normal dad, engaged in normal, mundane activities. But the reality, as with most things in William's world, was far more meticulously calculated. He had a powerful business associate arriving in 20 minutes, a clandestine meeting requiring the kind of absolute discretion best achieved by hiding in plain sight. And what better, more innocuous cover than a doting father taking his young son out for a plate of pasta? David, innocent to the machinations of his father's carefully constructed world, didn't consciously understand his role as a mere prop. But he felt it. He felt it in the charged silence of the room, in the oppressive weight of eyes that held fear and curiosity rather than warmth or welcome. William's intended destination was clear. The exclusive private VIP section nestled in the back, discreetly cordoned off with plush velvet ropes, far removed from the prying eyes of the main dining area. But then David abruptly stopped. Just stopped. Right there in the very heart of the elegant dining room. His small feet planted on the gleaming marble floor as if suddenly rooted to the spot. William felt the unexpected resistance in his son's hand and looked down, his first impulse to gently, yet firmly, pull him forward, to remind him of their schedule. But then he followed David's unblinking gaze and saw what had captured his son's complete and utter attention. In a small, somewhat neglected corner booth, tucked away near the bustling kitchen doors where the overhead lighting was less forgiving and the tabletops bore faint, telltale signs of wear, sat a woman and a little girl. The girl, no older than 7, was bubbling with infectious giggles, utterly delighted as she furiously scribbled with a handful of cheap crayons on her paper placemat, transforming it into a vibrant explosion of rainbow colors and unrestrained imagination. Her mother sat beside her, her posture radiating exhaustion, yet a soft, enduring smile graced her lips as she patiently helped her daughter decipher what looked like elementary math homework. With her other hand, she deftly twirled the cheapest pasta available on the menu onto a single fork. They were, William noticed, sharing one plate between them. The stark, almost violent contrast between that humble corner booth and everything else that defined William's meticulously controlled world slammed into him like a physical blow. David, a child who literally possessed every toy imaginable, who resided in a penthouse apartment that resembled a minimalist art museum, who had never in his privileged life wanted for a single material comfort, now stood utterly frozen. He stared at the small girl with her worn crayons and discount pasta as if he had just stumbled upon something utterly miraculous, a secret treasure previously unknown. And perhaps, William mused, he had. Because what William saw in that brightly lit corner wasn't simply poverty or struggle. It was something his immense wealth had never, ever been able to purchase. That little girl wasn't performing for an audience, wasn't pretending to be anything other than exactly what she was. Happy. Her joy was so pure, so unblemished, so startlingly unfiltered that it seemed to radiate outward, suffusing the entire restaurant with its innocent warmth. It was a searing, painful contrast to the hollow, echoing silence that permeated William's enormous penthouse every single night. David's grip on his father's hand, so desperate moments before, now loosened. And then, he uttered the simple words that would unexpectedly change everything. "Papa, I want to sit with them." William's first instinct was immediate, visceral, and automatic. Absolutely not. These were mere civilians, nobodies, the kind of family who couldn't genuinely afford to set foot in Luminoso on their very best day, let alone share a table with William Edward. He had an image, a formidable reputation meticulously built on fear and unquestioning respect, an unspoken understanding that he did not, under any circumstances, mingle with people who meticulously counted pennies to afford a single plate of pasta. But then, he made the profound mistake of looking down at his son's face. Really looking. And what he saw there froze the automatic refusal in his throat. A cold, unswallowable lump. David wasn't merely curious or briefly distracted. He was desperate. His eyes held a raw, pleading quality William had never witnessed before. A naked vulnerability that twisted something deep within him. It was the desperate gaze of a child who had been silently drowning in a sea of isolation, and had just, finally, spotted a lifeline. Hope, that's what it was. After years of an endless parade of nannies and stoic bodyguards, of an existence that felt more akin to protective custody than childhood, David had, for the first time, seen something he truly wanted, something he desperately needed. And it had nothing whatsoever to do with expensive toys or an endless string of private tutors. He simply wanted to sit with a little girl who was coloring on a paper placemat and laughing as if the entire world were a playground filled with magic. William stood there for what felt like an eternity, acutely aware of the simmering confusion radiating from his security team, the covertly curious stares of the other high-paying patrons, and the relentless, audible ticking of the clock counting down to his imminent meeting. Every logical, rational part of his formidable brain screamed at him to simply say no, to firmly guide David towards the safety of the VIP section, and proceed with the evening precisely as planned. But something in his son's expression, something in the raw, unguarded need shimmering in those young eyes, made him profoundly hesitate. When was the last time David had asked him for anything that wasn't already effortlessly provided? When was the last time his son had displayed such a depth of emotion about anything at all? William had forged an empire on making ruthless, hard decisions, on meticulously calculating risk versus reward, on never, ever displaying weakness. But standing there, in the very heart of his own formidable restaurant, holding the small, trembling hand of a 6-year-old boy who simply wished to sit with a happy family, he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the hardest decision he would ever be forced to make had absolutely nothing to do with business at all. So, William Edward, the man who silently controlled half of New York's labyrinthine underground, who could make grown, hardened men tremble with a single icy glance, who carried more blood on his hands than he could ever hope to wash clean, did something utterly, fundamentally out of character. He started walking. He started walking directly toward that modest corner booth. His security detail tensed instantaneously, their hands instinctively dropping to concealed weapons, unsure whether this was an unexpected threat, a bizarre test of loyalty, or simply inexplicable madness. The other diners, already captivated by the unusual spectacle, watched in stunned, disbelieving silence, desperately trying to comprehend why the most dangerous man in the entire room was now purposefully approaching a table that clearly could not afford to be there. And at that humble corner booth, Mary Andrew looked up from patiently assisting Bella with her homework. She saw William Edward, William Edward, walking directly toward them, and a wave of ice-cold recognition and terror washed over her, making her entire body go numb. She knew exactly who he was. His infamous face had dominated every news channel for weeks, federal investigators circling him like hungry sharks, whispers of racketeering, money laundering, and things far worse, spoken in hushed, careful tones. Mary had painstakingly spent the last 7 years of her life fiercely protecting Bella from every conceivable danger, working herself to the bone, pushing past exhaustion to keep her daughter safe, well-fed, and, most importantly, happy. And now, the most dangerous, most powerful man in New York was striding purposefully toward their table, a chilling resolve in his eyes. Her protective instincts surged, kicking in faster than conscious thought, primal and absolute. She immediately shifted in her seat, deftly moving Bella behind her, physically interposing her own body between her precious daughter and whatever terrifying event was about to unfold. Her heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs, but her voice emerged steady, astonishingly calm, despite the torrent of terror coursing through her veins. "We don't want any trouble, Mr. Edward." William stopped at the very edge of their small table, his imposing figure towering over them in his impeccably tailored, expensive suit. David still clung tightly to his hand. For a suspended moment, the entire restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. He could clearly discern the raw fear in Mary's wide eyes, the way she had instinctively positioned herself as a living shield. And something about that, about her immediate, selfless protection of her child, struck him with an unexpected force, hitting him harder than he could have ever anticipated. This woman had recognized him, knew precisely what he was capable of, and yet, instead of fawning obsequiously or freezing in terror, her very first instinct had been to defend. William looked at Mary, then at the little girl peeking out cautiously from behind her mother's arm with wide, curious, and utterly unafraid eyes. Then his gaze flickered back to his own son, who was now gripping his hand so tightly it almost hurt. He had rehearsed 1,000 intimidating lines over the years, perfected the chilling art of rendering people uncomfortable with merely his presence, but standing there, looking down at this frightened mother and her remarkably happy daughter, the words that finally emerged from his lips surprised even him. "My son wants to meet your daughter. May we join you?" The impossible question hung suspended in the air like an ethereal wisp of smoke, surreal and utterly unbelievable. And every single person in Luminoso, from the young waiter frozen mid-stride with a tray of drinks, to the wealthy patrons now openly pretending not to stare, waited with bated breath to witness what incomprehensible event would transpire next. Mary's mind raced through 1,000 frantic scenarios in the span of a single, agonizing heartbeat. All the myriad ways this could catastrophically go wrong. All the compelling reasons she should immediately grab Bella and flee. But then she looked at David's face and saw something that made her profoundly hesitate. The little boy wasn't looking at her with the cold detachment or entitled indifference she might have expected from a child raised in William Edward's dangerous world. No, he was gazing at Bella with pure, unfiltered wonder, as if he had just discovered something previously unimaginable, a new star in his private universe. Before Mary could even formulate a coherent response, Bella, with the fearless curiosity only a 7-year-old could possess, peeked out from behind her mother's arm, tilted her head innocently at David, and said brightly, "Hi, do you want to color with me? I'm making a rainbow, But I can't decide if purple goes next to red or next to blue. Just like that, with the disarming simplicity that only children truly possess, the suffocating tension that had gripped the restaurant shattered, dissolving into the elegant air. David's entire face transformed, a shy, tentative smile finally breaking through the mask of fear and solemnity he'd been wearing. And he nodded so eagerly, so vigorously, that William actually felt his son's small hand tremble with pure, unadulterated excitement in his own. William, with a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his security detail, pulled out a chair, the expensive leather groaning faintly under his considerable weight, and gently guided David into the seat right next to Bella. And Mary, despite every single rational thought in her head screaming that this was dangerous, foolish, and completely insane, found herself instinctively making space at their tiny, crowded table. But watching Bella immediately push her worn box of crayons toward David, watching this little boy in his impossibly expensive designer clothes carefully select a vibrant blue crayon as if he were handling something uniquely precious and fragile, Mary felt something profound shift within her chest. David held that crayon like he'd never been allowed to make a mess before, as if coloring outside the lines might invite severe reprimand. And when Bella, with an uninhibited gesture, grabbed his hand and showed him how to press hard to make the colors bright and bold, the look of absolute, breathtaking amazement on his face broke something inside Mary she hadn't even known was guarded. William sat down across from them, his massive frame somehow making the already small table feel even more confined. And Mary, despite herself, caught herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. This was the man the newspapers universally dubbed ruthless. The man federal investigators had been unable to touch despite years of relentless effort. But right now he wasn't scanning the room for potential threats, nor was he calculating his next strategic move. He was simply watching his son color, an expression of such raw, aching longing etched onto his features that Mary had to avert her gaze. It felt far too intimate to witness. The children quickly fell into an easy, comfortable rhythm. Bella chattered away incessantly about her school day, her favorite teacher, and a stray cat that frequented the alley behind their apartment building, while David listened with the intense, rapt attention of someone hearing a foreign language for the very first time. "My mama says I talk too much," Bella announced cheerfully, reaching for the bright red crayon, oblivious to the deeper currents flowing around them. "But she also says the world needs people who aren't afraid to use their voices, so I figure I'm just practicing for when I'm a doctor like she almost was." Mary felt a mortified flush creep up her cheeks at that, at the way her daughter so innocently, so casually, mentioned the deeply buried dream Mary had been forced to give up. But William's attention sharpened immediately, his gaze fixing on Mary. "You were in medical school?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite suspicion, but certainly not mere casual interest either. It was a probing, analytical curiosity. Mary shook her head slowly, keeping her eyes steadfastly on Bella's vibrant coloring. "Pre-med, 2 years. Before life, had other plans." She deliberately chose not to elaborate. She didn't explain that other plans translated to a positive pregnancy test and a boyfriend who had vanished faster than her scholarship money. She didn't mention the crushing student loan she was still painstakingly paying off 7 years later, while working double shifts just to keep Bella fed and sheltered. William opened his mouth, clearly poised to ask another question. Mary could almost see the query forming, could feel him attempting to piece together the fragmented story of her life. But then, a waiter appeared abruptly at their table, and the delicate moment fractured. The waiter was young, likely in his mid-20s, with slicked-back hair and a suit that almost but didn't quite fit him. And Mary recognized the type immediately. Someone who worked in establishments like this, someone who inevitably looked down on people like her. People who meticulously counted their tips and wore last season's clearance clothes. His eyes swept over Mary's worn cardigan and Bella's mismatched socks, and his lip curled just slightly, just enough to be subtly insulting without being overtly obvious. "Will you be ordering for the entire table, Mr. Edward?" he asked, his tone dripping with an unctuous, false courtesy. And then, his gaze flickered to Mary, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Or should we set up separate checks? I know some people prefer to pay their own way." The implication hung in the air like a noxious poison, thick and undeniable. That Mary was here to take advantage, to brazenly secure a free meal off William's immense wealth, that she was precisely the kind of opportunistic woman who would cynically use her own child to ensnare a wealthy man. Mary felt her face burn with a searing humiliation, felt Bella stiffen beside her, as even a 7-year-old could instinctively sense the thinly veiled insult being delivered. But before Mary could open her mouth to defend herself, or to simply grab their meager belongings and make a hasty exit, William's voice cut through the tension like a razor-sharp blade. "Apologize to the lady." 3 words, spoken so quietly that Mary almost didn't hear them. Yet the temperature in the entire room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. The waiter's smug expression faltered, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "Sir, I didn't mean." William leaned forward slightly, and in that instant, Mary understood precisely why people feared this man to their very core. Because the casual friendliness that had momentarily softened his formidable features while watching the children had vanished completely, replaced by something cold, absolute, and utterly terrifying. "Apologize to the lady, or you'll be serving drinks in Jersey by tomorrow. And trust me, you absolutely do not want to see what Jersey looks like in my organization." The threat was not loud or melodramatic. It was delivered with the calm, chilling certainty of a man who never made promises he couldn't keep. And the waiter's face, in seconds, went from a healthy tan to an ashen, sickly white. "I apologize, ma'am," the waiter stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably, no longer meeting Mary's eyes, but staring intently at the table as if he wished to disappear into its polished surface. "I was completely out of line. Please forgive me." He practically fled from their table after meekly taking their order, whatever William wanted for everyone. No separate checks, no questions asked. Mary sat there in stunned silence, her heart now hammering for entirely different reasons. Because she had just witnessed William Edward, a man who had built his terrifying empire on fear and calculated violence, ferociously defend her dignity as if it genuinely mattered to him. She had fully expected him to simply ignore the insult, or perhaps even silently agree with it, to see her exactly as the waiter had seen her. But instead, he had gone to bat for her, without a moment's hesitation. "You didn't have to do that," Mary said quietly, finding her voice. William merely shrugged, his expression once again unreadable. "Yes, I did. Nobody disrespects someone at my table, especially not someone who's shown my son more kindness in 10 minutes than most people in his life have shown him in 6 years." The food arrived quickly, too quickly. Clearly, their order had been bumped ahead of everyone else's. Mary watched as plates piled high with pasta, crusty bread, and vibrant salads covered their small table until it visibly groaned under the sheer weight of the feast. Bella's eyes went wide with undisguised wonder at the abundance, and David looked equally overwhelmed, like neither child quite knew where to begin. They ate, and the conversation flowed with an ease that it simply shouldn't have, an ease that made no logical sense given who they were and where they came from. Bella enthusiastically told a series of truly terrible knock-knock jokes that made David laugh so hard he nearly choked on his pasta. And Mary, incrementally, found herself relaxing. She found herself almost forgetting who she was sitting across from, until she'd catch a glimpse of the ever-present security detail hovering near the entrance, or see other diners whispering behind their hands while openly staring at their unlikely table. William, she discovered, was surprisingly easy to talk to when he wasn't actively terrifying, asking Bella earnest questions about school and listening to her answers as if they genuinely mattered. And Mary noticed the deeply tender way he watched his son, as if David were the most precious, most fragile thing in the entire world, and William had absolutely no idea how to adequately protect him from the harsh realities of his own life. Then William's phone buzzed insistently on the table, and everything, in an instant, changed. He glanced at the screen, and Mary watched every ounce of color drain from his face as if it had been siphoned away. His hand, which had been resting casually on the tabletop, suddenly clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles gleamed stark white. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his water glass, and took 2 shaky steps away from the table before stopping, his other hand instinctively coming up to clutch his chest. Mary's extensive medical training kicked in before conscious thought could fully catch up, her eyes automatically cataloging the symptoms with the precise, practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to read bodies in crisis. Rapid, shallow breathing, check star. Pale, clammy skin and visible sweating, check star. Hand clutching chest, eyes unfocused, a deer in headlights terror, check star. This, she immediately knew, wasn't a heart attack, despite what it might overtly resemble. This was a full-blown panic attack. And from the desperate way William was trying to conceal it, trying to maintain some semblance of control even as his own body betrayed him, Mary knew this was far from his first. Every instinct Mary possessed screamed at her to stay firmly in her seat, to keep Bella safe, to remember that this man was dangerous, his world volatile, and his problems were absolutely not hers to solve. But then she saw David's face, saw the little boy's expression crumble from radiant happiness into raw terror as he watched his powerful father struggle. And she saw Bella's small hand instinctively reach out to grip David's in a gesture of wordless, profound comfort. No child should watch their parents suffer alone. The words echoed with startling clarity in Mary's head. The very same words her own mother had told her years ago. And before she could second-guess herself, she was out of her seat and moving swiftly to William's side. "Mr. Edward, look at me," she said firmly, her professional nurse's voice taking over. The calm, authoritative tone she used in the emergency room when patients were teetering on the edge of losing it completely. "You're having a panic attack. I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through your mouth for 4. Can you do that? Look directly into my eyes and follow my breathing pattern." William tried desperately to focus on her, his eyes wild and unfocused, but Mary could see him fighting, struggling to grab onto her steady voice like a fragile lifeline. She demonstrated the breathing pattern, exaggerating it so he could easily follow. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, she watched his broad chest begin to rise and fall in a hesitant rhythm with hers. The restaurant around them erupted into immediate chaos. People stood up, pointing, their concerned murmurs rapidly escalating into shouts of panic. And suddenly, William's security detail was there. A solid wall of muscle, hands reaching instinctively for concealed weapons, eyes frantically scanning for any perceived threat. "Back up!" Mary snapped at them without even looking away from William. Her voice, infused with an unexpected authority, carried across the tumultuous room, making the grown men with guns actually hesitate. "He's not hurt. He's not in danger. And if you pull those weapons out, you are only going to make it worse. Give him space and let me work." She kept her steady hand firmly on William's arm, grounding him, and continued the rhythmic breathing pattern until finally, mercifully, his eyes cleared and focused on her face with something akin to dawning recognition and profound gratitude. William's breathing steadied, the color slowly returning to his ashen face, and he slumped heavily against the wall like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. Mary stayed close, ready to catch him if he finally gave way, but he managed to remain upright through sheer, brute force of will. The security team backed off reluctantly, still tense and hyper-alert, their gazes never leaving their boss. And Mary became acutely aware that every single person in the restaurant was now openly staring at them. Many holding up phones, undoubtedly recording, and definitely gossiping furiously. William looked at her, truly looked at her, and his voice came out rough and broken when he finally spoke, a raw, primal sound. "My wife. She died in my arms 4 years ago. Felt just like this. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't save her. Couldn't do anything but watch her slip away. I thought it was happening again." The confession was raw and utterly unguarded. A profound vulnerability that Mary suspected William Edward never, ever showed anyone. And she understood in that moment that beneath the expensive suits and the terrifying reputation was a man drowning in a grief so immense, so unprocessed, it had consumed him. "You didn't have to help me," William continued, his hands still pressed tightly against his chest, as if he were checking to ensure his own heart was still beating. "After what I am, After what you know about me, you could have just walked away. Should have walked away. Mary met his eyes steadily, unflinchingly, acutely aware that Bella and David were watching them from the table, two frightened children trying desperately to comprehend what had just transpired between the adults in their lives. Your son was watching, Mary said quietly but firmly, her voice unwavering. No child should see their parents suffer alone. I don't care who you are or what you've done. In that moment, you were just a father who needed help. And your boy needed to see that his father could be helped. That's what truly mattered. Something profound shifted in William's expression then. Something that looked almost like a tentative flicker of hope. And Mary realized with a jolt of shock that perhaps nobody had ever told this man he was truly worth saving before. The fragile moment shattered abruptly when William's head of security, a man built like a literal tank with a jagged scar bisecting his jaw, burst through the restaurant doors. He was clutching his phone, urgency etched violently across his usually impassive face. "Boss, we have a situation," he barked, not bothering to lower his voice, clearly not caring who heard. "Feds just raided the warehouse on 5th. They have Marcus in custody and word is, they're coming for you next. Tonight. We need to move now." William straightened instantly, the brief chink in his armor slamming shut, replaced by a wall of cold, almost predatory calculation. Mary saw the lightning-fast flick of his eyes to David, saw the raw fear that momentarily stripped away his hardened facade when he realized his son was about to be caught in the invisible, impending storm. In a handful of heartbeats, William made a decision, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly command as he spun to face his security detail. "Get them out of here now. Take them to the safe house on." Mary cut him off, her confusion quickly curdling into indignant anger. "What? We're not involved in whatever this is. We're just going to finish dinner and go home." The words were a defiant shield against a reality she refused to acknowledge. William grabbed her arm, his grip not hard enough to inflict pain, but firm enough to demand her absolute attention. The urgency blazing in his eyes was genuine and terrifying. "You helped me. That makes you a target, Mary. My enemies will use you to get to me. They saw you with me. They saw you care. And that's all they need." His voice, usually a controlled rumble, wavered, a raw tremor betraying the emotional weight of his words. "They'll come after you and your daughter to hurt me. And I can't have another person's blood on my hands because they made the mistake of showing me kindness." A wave of icy realization flooded Mary's veins, chilling her to the bone. The true, horrific meaning of his words sank in, and she gasped, her simple, innocent act of compassion perhaps having just painted a crimson target on Bella's unsuspecting back. Her gaze flew to her daughter, still sitting at the table, her small hand clasped in David's, both children watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes that mirrored her own growing dread. Mary's protective instincts roared to life, a primal, untamed force. Before she could respond, before William could issue another frantic order, the heavy, polished doors of Luminoso swung open again. The soft glow of the restaurant lights was momentarily swallowed by the silhouettes of three men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. Their entrance wasn't announced by fanfare, but by a palpable shift in the air, a sudden, chilling drop in temperature. Their eyes, sharp and unblinking, immediately locked onto William's table with the focused intensity of apex predators who had just scented their prey. These three men who strode through those doors made no effort to blend in, no attempt to hide their grim intentions. They moved with the cold, practiced efficiency of individuals who had executed such grim tasks countless times before, who knew precisely how these encounters began and, more importantly, how they always ended. William's security team reacted instantly, their hands instinctively moving inside their jackets toward the concealed weapons they carried. But the lead intruder, a man whose presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the room, merely raised a hand in a gesture that was somehow more profoundly threatening than any visible gun could be. "Easy now, Mr. Edward," the man said, his voice cutting across the suddenly silent, tension-choked restaurant. His words were calm, almost conversational, yet they carried a dangerous edge, and his accent, thick and unmistakable, placed him somewhere deep in South Brooklyn. "We're not here for a shootout. We're here for a conversation. A negotiation, you might say." His eyes, like black chips of ice, swept the room, dismissively cataloging the other diners, before settling, with chilling precision, on the corner booth where Bella and David still sat, frozen like small statues in their seats. And as Mary watched, a cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach, her blood turning to glacial slush when she saw the slow, deliberate way that man smiled. These weren't federal agents come to make an arrest. These men were something far more ancient, far more dangerous. And the utterly casual, almost indifferent way they regarded the children, a mere glance, told Mary everything she needed to know about how little human life, especially innocent life, meant to them. William stepped forward, positioning his body squarely between the menacing trio and the vulnerable table. And Mary watched, mesmerized and horrified, as his entire demeanor shifted, shedding the skin of the exhausted father, the vulnerable man struggling with a panic attack, and revealing instead the chilling essence of the ruthless crime boss that newspapers had so often warned people about. "You walk into my restaurant, Moretti?" William said, his voice dropping to something lethally calm, a low growl that vibrated with contained fury. "And you actually think you're walking out?" The lead man, apparently named Moretti, responded with an infuriatingly casual shrug, a gesture of supreme confidence that seemed to mock the very air William breathed. "Oh, we're definitely walking out, William. The only question is whether we're walking out alone, or whether we're taking some new friends with us." He nodded then, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head toward the booth, toward Bella specifically. And in that terrifying instant, Mary felt her entire world narrow, contracting violently to a single, unbearable point of absolute terror. Before she could even utter a sound, before William's security detail could react, two of Moretti's men lunged forward with terrifying, almost inhuman speed. A sudden, piercing scream tore through the restaurant, Bella's scream, as rough, brutal hands seized her arms and yanked her violently from the booth. Mary's own scream ripped through the air, raw and primal, a siren of pure anguish. It was the sound of a mother watching her most unthinkable nightmare unfold in agonizing real time. She threw herself forward without a moment's thought, her hands becoming claws, raking desperately at the face of the man holding Bella, her nails tearing at his skin hard enough to draw blood. But he merely backhanded her with a casual, almost dismissive brutality that sent her sprawling backward, collapsing to the hard tile floor. The restaurant erupted into immediate, unholy chaos. Other diners shrieked, scrambling and diving under tables like frightened mice. Staff members, their faces contorted in terror, ran blindly for the exits. William's security team, their faces grim, simultaneously pulled their weapons, the glint of steel ominous in the flickering light, while desperately trying to get a clear shot that wouldn't hit the little girl now being cruelly used as a human shield. David was sobbing hysterically, his small body pressed against his father's leg, clinging to him as if his life depended on it. And William stood there, rigid as a statue carved from stone, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, his mind visibly racing through a terrifying calculus of options and consequences. Moretti, unfazed by the pandemonium, calmly pulled out his phone and held it up, displaying the screen to William. A detailed map glowed there, GPS coordinates, property lines, intricate territory markers. "Here's how this works," Moretti said, his voice shockingly conversational, as if he were discussing a mundane business transaction rather than holding a 7-year-old child hostage. "You sign over the waterfront territories, all of them, and we give the kid back. You refuse? And well, kids are so fragile, aren't they?" Bella was crying now, a heart-wrenching sound, reaching her small arms out for her mother. Mary was struggling to push herself up from the floor, her vision swimming from the blow she'd taken. But all she could focus on was her daughter's terrified, tear-streaked face. William's hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides, his knuckles stark against his taut skin. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a promise of violence so absolute, so chillingly certain, that even Moretti's confident expression faltered slightly, a ripple of unease crossing his features. "You touched that child," William began, each word a hammer blow, and I will burn your entire family to the ground. Not just you, Moretti, your brothers, your cousins, everyone who shares your blood. I will make it my life's mission to erase the Moretti name from this city, and I will make sure it hurts the whole way down. The threat was not empty bravado. It was delivered with the absolute, chilling certainty of a man who had done far worse things for far lesser reasons. A man whose capacity for violence was not just theoretical, but deeply ingrained. And in that terrifying moment, Mary realized, with a cold certainty that stole her breath, just how truly dangerous William Edward truly was. But Moretti had clearly prepared for this reaction. He had anticipated William's rage, had perhaps even counted on it, because he merely smiled, a slow, predatory baring of teeth, and then pressed something cold and metallic against Bella's temple. A gun, small and silver, glinting menacingly, utterly terrifying against the innocent darkness of her daughter's curls. Big words from a man whose empire is already crumbling, Moretti countered, his voice laced with mocking contempt. The feds have your warehouses. Your second in command is singing like a canary. And now you're going to lose your territories, too. Unless you want to add child killer to your list of sins, you're going to do exactly what I say. William's security team, though formidable, stood paralyzed. Their weapons were drawn, the ominous red laser sights painting crimson dots on the three intruders, but nobody could take the shot. Not with Bella in the way, not without risking her life, a horrifying calculus that rendered even their trained reflexes useless. The standoff stretched on, each second feeling like an agonizing hour, the entire restaurant holding its collective breath, a suffocating silence pierced only by Bella's muffled sobs. Mary pushed herself up from the floor on shaking arms, her vision still blurring from the impact. Even through the raw terror and profound shock, her nurse's brain, a finely tuned instrument of observation, was still working. She looked at the man holding Bella, really looked at him, with the meticulous, trained gaze she used to observe patients, searching for any detail, any weakness. And her eyes caught on something most people would have missed. There, on his belt, partially visible beneath his jacket, was a medical device she recognized immediately. An insulin pump, its small screen showing flickering readings, the kind that diabetic patients wore to manage their blood sugar levels throughout the day. Mary's mind raced, a frantic torrent of implications, through the medical knowledge she had accumulated in 2 grueling years of pre-med and 7 intensive years of emergency room nursing. And suddenly she had an idea, desperate, possibly stupid, but the only card she had left to play. She sucked in a breath, a ragged gasp, and then screamed, loud enough to make everyone in the room flinch, her voice pitched with perfect, manufactured panic. "Your man's pump is malfunctioning," she shrieked, her voice cracking with feigned terror. "Look at the reading. He'll go into shock in minutes. His blood sugar's dropping too fast." Every head in the room whipped toward her, including the gunman holding Bella. And Mary saw a flicker of confusion, then alarm, cross his face as he instinctively glanced down at his pump. The reading was, in fact, perfectly fine. Mary had no idea what it actually said from this distance. But that split-second moment of distraction was all William's team needed. The security guard closest to Bella moved with a speed that defied the laws of physics, a blur of motion. He grabbed the gunman's wrist, twisting, forcing the weapon away from Bella's head, while simultaneously pulling her free from his grip. 2 shots rang out, deafening in the enclosed space, echoing with violent finality, and suddenly everyone was moving. William, a force of nature, dived forward to snatch Bella into his arms. Mary scrambled desperately toward her daughter. David was screaming for his father, a heartbreaking sound of pure relief and terror. And Moretti's men, disoriented by the sudden shift, found themselves surrounded by very angry, very well-trained security personnel who no longer had to worry about collateral damage. The ensuing fight was brutal and efficiently executed. William's team neutralized the threat with a swift, merciless violence that made Mary instinctively grab both children and turn their faces away, shielding them from the raw brutality. Within seconds, all 3 intruders were on the ground, disarmed, restrained, bleeding from various injuries, but, remarkably, still alive. Moretti was cursing, spitting blood and invective, his carefully planned hostage situation having fallen apart because of a clever lie about an insulin pump. William crossed the distance to Mary and Bella in 3 long, powerful strides. Mary found herself clutching her daughter, holding her close, while this dangerous, terrifying man, gently checked Bella for injuries with hands that were surprisingly careful, tender even, despite the fresh blood staining his knuckles. "She's okay," he murmured, more to himself than to Mary, his voice rough with emotion. "She's okay. She's not hurt." Bella was sobbing uncontrollably into Mary's shoulder, her small body shaking violently with terror, and Mary held her so tightly she was probably hurting her. But she couldn't seem to loosen her grip, needing the physical connection as much as Bella did. The wail of sirens filled the air outside, growing louder by the second, a cacophony of approaching authority. Within minutes, the restaurant was swarming with police officers, federal agents and windbreakers with FBI stamped across the back, and EMTs moving through the chaos, checking people for injuries. The scene was controlled chaos. Witnesses being separated for statements, evidence markers being placed, Moretti and his men being hauled away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and police brutality. William stood in the center of it all, David still clinging to his leg like a terrified limpet. Mary watched as a man in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit, clearly William's lawyer, appeared at his side, speaking in urgent, hushed tones, his words a furious torrent of legal advice. "Don't say anything," the lawyer insisted, gripping William's arm, his face pale with concern. "Not a word until we sort this out. They can't prove you ordered any retaliation. They can't connect you to." But William wasn't listening to his lawyer. His gaze was fixed on Mary, who sat on the floor, holding Bella and rocking her gently, and then on David, whose sobs had finally quieted to hiccuping breaths against his father's leg. A woman in an FBI jacket approached them, her badge identifying her as Special Agent Sarah Chun. Her expression was the practiced neutral of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything, her eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Edward, I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning. You have the right to remain." William cut her off, his voice rough but steady, filled with a newfound resolve. "I'll cooperate. Full immunity, witness protection for my son, and for them." He pointed directly at Mary and Bella, still sitting on the floor amidst the wreckage of what should have been a simple, celebratory dinner. Agent Chun's eyebrows rose skeptically, a hint of disdain in her gaze. "Why would we protect a waitress and her kid? They're witnesses, sure, but they're not part of your organization. They don't need." William stepped closer to the agent, his voice dropping, but somehow carrying more weight, more authority, because of its quiet intensity. "Because I'm going to dismantle the Moretti organization from the inside. I'm going to give you everything. Names, locations, operations, money trails, all of it. But only if they're protected. She saved my life tonight. And more importantly, she saved my son from watching another person die. That's worth more than any deal you could offer me." The FBI agent studied William for a long, assessing moment, her mind clearly calculating the genuine nature of this extraordinary offer, weighing whether it was a sincere proposition or just another elaborate manipulation. But Mary could see the exact moment Agent Chun decided it was real, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes. "We'll need to discuss terms," Agent Chun said carefully, her voice losing some of its skepticism. "And you'll need to surrender yourself into custody tonight while we sort this out." William nodded, already reaching into his jacket to remove his phone, his wallet, anything that could be considered a weapon or a tool. As the federal agents began the process of booking him, as the restaurant slowly emptied of everyone except law enforcement and a few traumatized staff members, Mary finally managed to stand on shaking legs, Bella still wrapped around her like a terrified koala. She caught William's arm as agents prepared to lead him away, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying all the confusion, the fear, and the desperate, overwhelming need to understand that coursed through her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "You don't even know us. We're nobody to you. We're just people who happen to be in your restaurant at the wrong time." William looked down at her, and Mary saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Something vulnerable and honest, almost desperately earnest. "Because for the first time since my wife died," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I saw my son smile, really smile. And it was because of your daughter. Because of you. I've spent 4 years building an empire on fear, making sure everyone knew I was too dangerous to touch, too powerful to challenge. But tonight, you showed me something I'd forgotten existed. You showed me what my son's been missing all this time. What I've been missing." His voice cracked slightly then, the careful controls slipping away. "You showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't building walls. It's tearing them down. You walked into danger to help him. You risked yourself for a stranger's child. And that kind of courage, that kind of love, that's worth protecting. That's worth changing everything for." Mary felt hot tears streaming down her face as she processed his words, felt the immense weight of what he was offering, safety, protection, but also the daunting reality of entering his world, of being inextricably bound to a man whose past was soaked in violence, even if his future might, impossibly, be different. Agent Chun cleared her throat impatiently, a crisp reminder of the present reality, and William allowed himself to be guided toward the door. But he looked back one more time, his eyes finding David, then lingering on Mary and Bella. "They'll take you to a safe location tonight," he called back, his voice firm, a final plea. "Don't fight them on this, Mary. Please let me do this one thing right." And then he was gone, escorted out into the flashing blue and red lights of police cars and the blinding glare of news vans that had already gathered outside, a frenzied tableau of chaos. Mary stood there, in the ruins of Luminoso, holding her daughter, the scent of gunpowder and fear still clinging to the air, wondering how a simple dinner had just completely upended her entire life. Bella's voice was small and muffled against Mary's shoulder when she finally spoke, a soft, fearful whisper. "Mama, is David's daddy going to be okay?" Mary held her daughter tighter, watching through the restaurant windows as William was placed into a federal vehicle, a silhouette swallowed by the flashing lights. And she realized with startling, painful clarity that she didn't know the answer to that question. But somehow, impossibly, she found herself caring desperately about what happened to him. The safe house in suburban Connecticut was nothing like Mary had imagined witness protection would be. No bunker-like compound, no sterile government facility with high fences and watchtowers, just a modest 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street where neighbors waved from their porches and kids rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. For the first 2 weeks, Mary and Bella lived in a strange, unsettling limbo of normalcy and terror. Bella attended a new school under a new last name. Her small world abruptly shrunk and redefined, while federal marshals sat in unmarked cars at the end of their driveway, silent sentinels whose presence was a constant, chilling reminder of the lingering threat. Mary tried to establish some kind of routine. Breakfast at 7, homework after school, bedtime stories at 8 o'clock. A desperate attempt to impose order on a life that had spiraled out of control. But every unexpected sound, every creak of the house, every rustle outside, made her heart race, and she kept the curtains drawn tight, even though Agent Chun had assured her repeatedly that nobody knew where they were. Bella asked about David constantly, her small voice filled with a child's simple yearning, wondering if he was okay, if he was scared, if they'd ever see each other again. And Mary had no answers to give her daughter because she didn't know herself what William's cooperation with the FBI actually meant for their uncertain future. She'd see his face on the news sometimes, grainy footage of him being escorted into anonymous federal buildings, headlines screaming about the notorious crime boss who'd turned informant. And she'd wonder if he regretted the monumental choice he'd made, if protecting them had truly been worth dismantling everything he'd spent his life building. 3 months into their relocation on a Tuesday afternoon, when Mary was unpacking groceries, the mundane rhythm of her new life a thin veneer over persistent anxiety, and Bella was diligently doing math homework at the kitchen table, there was a tentative knock at the door that made Mary's blood run cold. The federal marshal assigned to their detail stepped inside first, his hand resting almost imperceptibly on his weapon. his eyes scanning the room. But then he nodded, a subtle gesture of permission, and stepped aside to reveal William Edwards standing on her porch. He looked different. Thinner, perhaps, the sharp edges of his previous life softened, worn down by stress and change. Tired, yes, but there was also an unfamiliar lightness about him. He was wearing jeans and a plain button-down shirt instead of the expensive, imposing suits she had last seen him in. And there was something new in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before, a quiet, almost fragile sense of peace. "They said I could visit?" William said quietly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with them, or where they belonged. "Check on your safety. Make sure you and Bella are adjusting okay." His voice was careful, almost formal, like he was terrified of overstepping, of intruding on the fragile peace he had helped create. But then Bella, recognizing the voice, looked up from her homework, her face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy, and squealed, "David!" And suddenly David was there too, peeking around his father's legs with a shy, tentative smile. In the next instant, both children collided in a hug that nearly knocked over the kitchen chairs, their laughter echoing through the small house, a sound of innocent reunion. The visits became regular after that, a quiet, weekly ritual. Once a week at first, always supervised by federal agents who sat in the living room, pretending not to listen while William and Mary made awkward small talk, navigating the minefield of their shared, violent past and their uncertain, fragile present. But gradually, imperceptibly, something shifted between them. It happened so slowly, like the erosion of a riverbank, so subtly that you didn't notice until suddenly water was flowing where solid ground used to be, forging new paths, creating new landscapes. William started bringing ingredients, proper Italian ingredients, carefully sourced from a specialty shop the FBI had painstakingly cleared for security. And he would teach both children, his large, powerful hands surprisingly gentle, how to make his grandmother's cherished recipes in Mary's cramped kitchen. A space transformed by the warmth of shared activity. "You fold the dough like this," he'd say, his deep voice soft, as he guided Bella's smaller hands through the rhythmic motion of making fresh pasta, a domestic ballet. "My nana used to say that you put love into food with your hands, that people could taste the care you took." David would stand on a step stool next to them, flour dusting his nose, his small face beaming with delight, laughing when Bella accidentally flung dough across the kitchen, a cloud of white innocence. And Mary would watch from the doorway, a silent observer, feeling something warm and dangerous, something both terrifying and deeply appealing, growing in her chest. She learned things about William during those visits that the newspapers had never reported, pieces of his story that emerged slowly, reluctantly, like old photographs developing in a darkroom. He'd started seeing a therapist, court-mandated at first, a condition of his cooperation, but he kept going even after the requirement ended, finding solace and understanding in the sessions. And sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd mention things his therapist had said, insights about grief and control, about the impenetrable walls people build when they're too afraid to feel, too terrified to be heard again. "Dr. Morrison says I used power as a substitute for connection," William told her one evening while they washed dishes side by side, the rhythmic clinking of ceramic and glass a comforting counterpoint to their quiet conversation, the kids playing contentedly in the next room. "That I convinced myself if I was feared enough, I'd never have to risk being hurt again. Turns out that's just another kind of prison." Mary had looked at him then, really looked at him and seen not the formidable mafia boss, the ruthless power broker, but the man underneath. The one who had loved his wife enough that her death had nearly destroyed him. The one who had built an empire not just for power, but in a misguided attempt to protect his son from the very isolation and danger that empire ultimately created. The kids became inseparable in a way that transcended their weekly visits. They'd video chat every night before bed, their faces glowing in the screens, sharing stories about their days, their worries, their small triumphs. And David, who had lost his own mother so young, started calling Mary Miss Mary, with a kind of reverence usually reserved for favorite teachers or beloved aunts. His voice filled with a quiet affection. "Miss Mary, can you help me with my spelling words?" he'd ask, his eyes wide and earnest. And Mary would feel her heart crack a little more with each request, because this child was so hungry for maternal attention, for simple kindness, that he soaked up every small gesture like a plant that had been kept in the dark too long, now finally basking in sunlight. Bella, for her part, had appointed herself David's personal comedy director, a self-proclaimed expert in childhood joy, determined to teach him how to simply be a kid, how to make up silly songs that made no sense, how to build magnificent blanket forts that defied gravity, how to laugh at absolutely nothing until your stomach hurt and tears streamed down your face. Mary watched William watch his son during these moments, saw the way William's expression would soften, his features relaxing into something almost painful, a wistful yearning. And she understood, with a profound clarity, that he was witnessing David experience the joyful, carefree childhood he had been utterly unable to provide in his previous, dark life. 6 months into this strange new existence, Mary found herself in an impossible position. She was falling in love with a man whose past terrified her, whose present was complicated by federal trials and ongoing testimony, and whose future was completely, dangerously uncertain. The FBI had successfully prosecuted 3 major crime families using William's testimony, sending dozens of people to prison, dismantling criminal networks that had seemed impregnable. But that success, as Agent Chun had grimly warned, came with severe consequences. There was a price on William's head now, a substantial one. And Agent Chun had warned Mary in blunt, unequivocal terms that William would never truly be safe, that someone somewhere would always be looking for revenge. Mary lay awake at night, weighing the risks, trying desperately to separate what she wanted from what was truly safe for Bella. And the math, the logical calculation, never quite worked out cleanly. But then she'd remember the way William had offered his own life to save Bella in that restaurant, the terrifying certainty in his eyes, the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and breakable, deserving of all protection, the way he was genuinely trying to become a better man, not because the courts required it, not for show, but because he'd finally found a reason, a profound, transformative reason worth changing for. The moment everything crystallized, the moment she understood that the math no longer mattered, happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon in Mary's kitchen. William had brought supplies to make pizzelles, those thin, delicate Italian waffle cookies, and David and Bella were taking turns with the pizzelle iron, creating misshapen but enthusiastic cookies while arguing cheerfully about whether chocolate or anise flavor was superior. Mary was cleaning up flour from every conceivable surface, a thin dusting of white covering countertops and floor. And William was patiently teaching the kids his grandmother's exacting technique, his voice soft, his presence a comforting anchor. And suddenly he just stopped talking mid-sentence. He looked around the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the scene of domestic bliss, with an expression of such profound wonder, such quiet awe, that Mary had to ask what was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," William said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's just, I forgot what this felt like. Being happy, being normal, being just a dad making cookies with kids instead of a boss making deals with criminals." He wiped at his eyes quickly, almost furtively, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. But Mary saw the tears, understood their depth, and knew that this man had been living in an emotional winter for so long, a landscape of cold, barren fear and control, that he had truly forgotten what warmth felt like. Later that evening, after the kids had eaten their weight in pizzelles and were now crashed on the couch, replete and exhausted, watching a movie, William knelt down in Mary's modest kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd shared dozens of meals, where he had slowly, tentatively taught his son to laugh again, where Mary had started to believe in second chances, for herself and for others. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled a small box from his pocket. Nothing fancy or expensive, no ostentatious display of wealth, just a simple band that looked like it had been chosen with careful thought, with sincere intention, rather than careless affluence. "I have nothing to offer you but a man trying to be better," William said, his voice steady despite the raw vulnerability in his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. "No empire, no power, no guarantees that this life won't always have shadows chasing it. Just me, And a kid who loves your daughter like a sister. I know I don't deserve you. I know my past is something you'd be taking on. But, Mary cut. Stop, Mary said, her hand coming up, a gentle but firm barrier against his words. She saw the raw interplay of hope and fear etched across William's face in equal, agonizing measure. Stop, she repeated, her voice steady as a rock in a storm, and she watched William's entire world visibly shatter. His hands, which had so confidently held the ring box moments before, now trembled violently as he began to close it, his gaze falling, preparing himself for the inevitable, for the rejection he believed he deserved. But then Mary did the unexpected. She knelt, a graceful descent that brought her to his level there on the kitchen floor, her eyes locking onto his. She took his face in her hands, holding him captive, forcing him to meet her gaze, to truly see her. "You're right," she began, her voice soft, yet unwavering. "You don't deserve me. Not yet. Not after everything you've done. Not after all the people you've hurt, the lives you've twisted. Not after building a life, an entire empire on violence and fear." She felt William flinch beneath her touch, a tremor of shame passing through him. But she held firm, refusing to let him retreat into the shadowed fortresses he'd once used to hide. "But the man you're becoming," she continued, her thumb stroking his cheek. "The father I see with David, patient and kind, the person who goes to therapy every week, who spends Saturday afternoons making bezels with the kids, who teaches them that love can be kneaded into food with your own hands. Asterisk him asterisk, I could love him. I already love him." William's breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in his throat, and Mary watched as tears, bright and undeniable, spilled over and traced paths down his cheeks, a cascade of relief and sorrow. "So yes, William Edward," she affirmed, a radiant smile finally breaking through her composure. "Yes, I'll marry you, but you're going to have to keep earning it. Every single day for the rest of your life. You're going to have to choose us, choose this life, every single day over the easier path, over the insidious temptation of your old world, over everything that might try to pull you back into darkness. Can you do that?" William nodded so fiercely, so desperately, that he nearly knocked their foreheads together. His yes came out choked, a raw, heartfelt sound absolutely brimming with sincerity. "Every day," he promised, his voice thick with emotion, as he fumbled to slide the simple silver band onto Mary's finger. His hand still shook so badly that she had to guide his own hand, helping him complete the gesture that sealed their future. "Every single day, I'll choose this. Choose you. Choose the life we're building instead of the life I'm leaving behind." They stayed there, kneeling on the cool kitchen floor, wrapped in each other's embrace, the distant murmur of the television in the next room a soft, irrelevant backdrop. Their children, oblivious and absorbed in their movie, remained blissfully unaware that their little, fractured family had just officially and irrevocably become permanent. Mary allowed herself to finally cry, a torrent of tears that cleansed her, releasing all the fear and hope and the impossible, boundless love she had been carrying, a secret burden and a precious treasure, for the past 6 months. And William held her as if she were the most fragile, most invaluable thing he had ever possessed, which, to a man who had willingly given up an empire built on power and fear, she truly was. 6 months later, the wedding took place in a small, unassuming Catholic church nestled in the rolling hills of Connecticut. There were no flashing cameras, no fawning paparazzi, nothing resembling the lavish society events that used to fill the gossip pages back when William had been someone important in all the wrong ways. The guest list was tiny, curated with care and intention. Mary's closest nursing friends from her old hospital, a handful of kind neighbors who had become genuine friends during their time in the safe house, Agent Shun and 2 other federal marshals who had, to their surprise, grown oddly protective of their entire situation, and Dr. Morrison, the steadfast therapist who had guided William through the labyrinthine journey of his transformation. David, a proud and beaming 8-year-old, stood as his father's best man, resplendent in a suit that, for once, actually fit him properly. Bella, 9, an increasingly confident and radiant young lady, was Mary's maid of honor, looking like a little princess in a dress she'd helped pick out. Both kids grinned so wide their faces probably ached from pure, unadulterated joy. The church was simply adorned, fragrant with the fresh, humble beauty of daisies and baby's breath. Nothing expensive, nothing showy, just a quiet elegance. Mary walked down the aisle in a dress she'd found at a consignment shop, a beautiful, ivory lace gown that made her feel exquisite without costing a fortune. William stood at the altar, a vision of quiet dignity in a simple black suit, devoid of designer labels or any ostentatious displays of wealth. And when Mary finally appeared at the end of the aisle, he cried openly, without an ounce of shame or embarrassment, his tears a testament to his profound love and gratitude. They were halfway through their heartfelt vows when the heavy oak church doors creaked open with a deep, resonant groan that made everyone turn, a collective gasp echoing through the sacred space. William's entire body went rigid with tension, his hand instinctively moving to Mary's arm, a protective gesture honed by years of danger. Mary felt his security instincts, dormant for months, suddenly kick into high gear. Even here, even now, on what should have been the safest, most joyous day of his new life, the threat felt palpable. A man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit stood silhouetted in the doorway, blocking the golden afternoon light. He began to walk slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing ominously in the sudden, profound quiet of the church. As he drew closer, Mary could discern the unmistakable family resemblance. The same strong, unyielding jawline, the same piercing dark eyes, the same commanding presence that effortlessly demanded attention. The man paused, then removed his dark sunglasses, revealing eyes that held a complex, warring mixture of pain and pride. "James," William breathed, the name a whisper of recognition and shock. Mary realized then. This was William's brother, the one who had taken over the family business, the shadowy empire. When William had walked away, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a year. James Edward walked all the way to the altar, a silent, powerful figure, and the small gathering of wedding guests held their collective breath, wondering if this was the moment everything would unravel, if the past had finally caught up, a monstrous wave poised to crash into their fragile present. But then, James's face crumpled slightly, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was broken, raw with an emotion Mary hadn't expected. "You got out. You actually got out." His gaze swept across the simple church, the intimate gathering of true friends and family, the proud figures of David and Bella in their wedding finery, and finally settled on Mary, radiant in her consignment dress, looking at William as if he had hung the very moon in the sky. "And you found this. Found real. Found clean." James then turned to Mary, and in his eyes, she saw not anger, but a profound, aching grief. Grief for the brother he'd lost to a different kind of life, a life beyond his reach. Grief for the dark, inescapable path he himself was still walking. "Take care of him," James said, his voice thick with a raw, unexpected emotion. "He's the only Edward who still has a soul, the only one who got out before this life burned everything good out of him." James reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. William tensed, old, hardwired instincts never quite dying, his body preparing for a threat. But what James pulled out was simply an envelope, thick and official-looking. He placed it gently on the pew beside them. When William opened it with shaking hands, Mary saw a deed, property documents, permits, and licenses, all meticulously filed and legally obtained. "It's a restaurant space," James explained, his voice softer now. "Small place in downtown Hartford. Nothing fancy, but it's clean money, a legal purchase, no strings attached. Figured if you're going to teach those kids to make pizzazzles, you might as well do it somewhere official." He looked at his brother, and Mary watched years of complicated history, of unspoken pain and profound understanding, pass between them in a single eloquent glance. "I can't follow you out, William. I'm in too deep and we both know it. But I can make sure you stay out. I can make sure nobody from our world ever bothers you or your family again. Consider it my wedding gift, your freedom permanently." Then, James Edward turned and, without another word, walked back down the aisle, out into the glorious sunshine, disappearing back into the shadows of a life his brother had finally, miraculously escaped. Mary squeezed William's hand, feeling him shake with silent, wrenching sobs beside her, the weight of a lifetime of fear and obligation finally lifting. 2 years had blossomed since that small church wedding, 2 years of diligent, loving effort, building something profound from almost nothing. The restaurant, an unexpected gift from James, had become precisely what William and Mary had needed it to be. A second chance made tangible, forged in brick and mortar, fragrant with the intoxicating scents of garlic and basil. William and Mary's sat on a prominent corner in downtown Hartford, an inviting beacon. It was nothing fancy, nothing pretentious, just a cozy, 50-seat space with warm exposed brick walls. An eclectic collection of mismatched wooden tables that William himself had painstakingly refinished, and an open kitchen where customers could watch their food being prepared with an obvious blend of care and skill. The sign outside, hand-painted with a charming, rustic touch, was simple yet welcoming. Underneath the name, it proudly declared, "Where everyone's family," in a graceful script that Bella had helped design. This was not Luminoso, with its glittering chandeliers, velvet ropes, and an atmosphere of stark exclusivity. This was a place where regular people came for Sunday dinner, where the wait staff knew your name and your usual order, where kids were genuinely welcome, and high chairs weren't begrudgingly provided, but readily and cheerfully available. It was everything William's old life hadn't been. Honest, warm, open, and built on something far more substantial and enduring than fear. On a typical Tuesday afternoon in late September, the restaurant hummed with a comfortable, familiar rhythm, the easy flow that comes from a well-established routine. David, now 8 years old and having shot up at least 3 inches in the past year, sat ensconced in their unofficial corner booth, deeply absorbed in his math homework with a kind of focused intensity that prompted his teachers to write glowing comments on his report cards. Bella, 9, and radiating an increasing confidence, sat across from him, patiently helping him work through a particularly tricky word problem while simultaneously finishing her own science assignment about the intricate dance of the water cycle. They claimed that corner booth as their own, arriving faithfully every day after school, spreading their books and papers across the table while William cooked in the back and Mary gracefully managed the front of house. If Johnny has 12 pizzas and gives away 3/4 of them, how many does he have left? Bella read aloud, her finger tracing the words in the textbook. David scrunched up his nose in deep concentration for a moment before triumphantly answering, 3 pizzas, because 3/4 of 12 is 9, and 12 minus 9 is 3. Bella grinned, a flash of pure delight, and high-fived him. Their easy, affectionate camaraderie a world away from the scared, lonely children they had been just 2 years ago. Mary moved through the restaurant with a practiced grace, her movements slightly adjusted to accommodate the prominent swell of her belly. 6 months pregnant with twins, a fact that still occasionally made her laugh in disbelief when she caught her reflection in the polished glass of the counter. She had glowed throughout this entire pregnancy in a way she never had with Bella. Perhaps it was because this time she wasn't doing it alone. She wasn't consumed by terror about how she'd afford diapers and childcare. She wasn't facing single motherhood with nothing but fierce determination and a gnawing fear. William had been absurdly, wonderfully attentive from the moment they'd seen those 2 fluttering heartbeats on the ultrasound screen, devouring every pregnancy book he could find, attending every single appointment, bombarding the obstetrician with so many questions that Mary had to gently remind him that, actually, she was the medical professional in the family. Now, he watched her constantly from the kitchen, a mixture of awe and gentle terror in his eyes, ready to catch her if she so much as swayed. And while his enthusiastic overprotectiveness sometimes drove her playfully crazy, Mary found it deeply endearing that this man who had once commanded a vast, ruthless empire now worried about whether she was drinking enough water. William himself worked in the open kitchen, a whirlwind of focused energy. Watching him cook was like watching someone utterly in their element, someone who had finally, unequivocally found the thing they were meant to do. He wore a simple white apron with the restaurant's logo embroidered on it, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms. He moved through the bustling space with a confident efficiency, chatting easily with customers who sat at the bar, mesmerized as they watched him work his magic. The secret to good carbonara, he was explaining to a young couple on their first date, his voice passionate and animated, is that you never add cream. It's a bastardization of the recipe. You use the starchy pasta water and the residual heat of the pasta itself to create that rich, velvety sauce with the eggs and cheese. My grandmother, he added with a twinkle in his eye, she would have hit me with a wooden spoon if I'd ever used cream. The couple laughed, charmed by his genuine passion, and William, with a flourish, plated their dishes with meticulous care before sliding them across the counter. This man, so warm, so open, so utterly at peace, was so far removed from the cold, guarded figure who had walked into Luminoso 2 years ago that sometimes Mary had to pause, to pinch herself, to truly remember they were the same person. She often found herself reconciling the radiating warmth and openness she saw now with the chilling, calculating demeanor she had witnessed that very first, terrifying night. The very walls of the restaurant told their story, a visual narrative in photographs and children's artwork, all carefully framed and proudly displayed. There, near the entrance where everyone could see it, hung their wedding photo, small and intimate, both of them crying happy tears at the altar, a beacon of their unlikely triumph. Next to it was Bella's drawing from 2 years ago, the one she had made in that first bewildering week in the safe house, a way to process everything that had happened. Titled in her careful, childish handwriting, Our Forever Family, she'd drawn 4 stick figures holding hands. Her, Mary, David, and William, beneath a cheerful house, a bright sun, and a scattering of vibrant flowers. It was the kind of art that parents usually stuck on refrigerators with magnets, but William had insisted on having it professionally framed, because it represented the sacred moment they had all, collectively, chosen each other. Scattered throughout the restaurant were other markers of their unfolding, beautiful life. David's school awards, Bella's honor roll certificates, candid photos of cooking classes they'd hosted for neighborhood kids, and framed newspaper clippings from the Hartford Courant's glowing review that had hailed their restaurant as a hidden gem serving authentic Italian cuisine with genuine heart. Their regular customers had become like an extended family, sharing in their joys and milestones. They knew about Mary's pregnancy and brought thoughtful, tiny gifts for the twins. They asked after the kids' grades and celebrated when William finally got his official culinary certification from the community college where he'd been taking night classes, a testament to his dedication and newfound purpose. Mrs. Chun, no relation to Agent Chun, though the coincidence always made them smile, came in every Thursday for the chicken marsala and always brought her grandson, who happened to be in Bella's class at school. The Robinsons reserved the same corner table every anniversary, and William, without fail, always sent out a complimentary dessert, adorned with a single, flickering candle. This was community in a way that William's old life had never allowed relationships built on genuine connection, on shared moments and mutual respect, rather than on cold transactions, imposed obligations, or pervasive fear. Occasionally, former associates from William's previous life would recognize him. There had been a particularly tense moment about 6 months ago when someone from the old neighborhood had walked in, freezing instantly upon seeing William's face across the bustling dining room. But Agent Chun's promise had held true, and word had apparently spread through certain circles that William Edward was off limits, protected by his brother's decree and simply not worth the trouble. The afternoon was beginning to wind down, shifting gears toward the dinner prep, when Bella suddenly looked up from her homework, her eyes bright with a sudden, profound realization. "Mama," she announced, her voice clear and decisive. "I'm going to be a doctor like you almost were, and David's going to be a chef like his dad, and we're going to work together when we're grown-ups." David nodded enthusiastically, a broad grin spreading across his face, adding, "Yeah, I'll make delicious food for sick people to make them feel better, and Bella will make them healthy again, and we'll be an amazing team." Mary felt tears prick at her eyes. Pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything lately, and she exchanged a knowing look with William across the restaurant. Both of them silently acknowledged the profound miracle of watching these children dream about futures that were bright and possible, completely untainted by the creeping darkness that had once threatened to swallow them whole. William wiped his hands on his apron and came around the counter, kneeling down by the booth to be at the kids' eye level. "That sounds like a perfect plan," he said seriously, treating their childhood dreams with the genuine respect they deserved. "But first, you've got to finish that homework, and then maybe you two can help me prep the vegetables for tonight's service." The dinner rush began promptly at 5:30, and the restaurant quickly filled with the comfortable, happy noise of families and couples and friends gathering around food, laughter, and clinking silverware, creating a symphony of contentment. William worked the kitchen with 2 part-time cooks he'd personally trained, their movements synchronized and efficient, while Mary, despite his gentle protests that she should be resting, managed the front. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she'd reminded him for the 1,000th time, a playful exasperation in her voice. "And sitting around doing nothing just makes me crazy." David and Bella had long since finished their homework and were now helping in their own age-appropriate ways. David carefully folding napkins the way William had taught him, creating neat, crisp squares, and Bella refilling water glasses, charming customers with her bright personality and infectious smile. This was their life now, ordinary, yes, but profoundly beautiful, a mosaic of small, precious moments. It was so fundamentally different from where they'd started, from the chaos and fear of their past, that sometimes Mary had to pinch herself to truly believe it was real. At 7 o'clock, when the dinner rush had settled into a comfortable, steady flow, Mary caught William's eye across the room and gestured subtly toward the door with a smile, a secret language they both understood immediately. They untied their aprons, hanging them neatly and entrusting the restaurant to their capable staff, then collected David and Bella, who protested only mildly about leaving before closing time. "Come on," William said, his voice warm, taking Mary's hand and helping her navigate gently around the remaining tables. "Let's go for a walk before it gets dark." They stepped out into the early autumn evening, the air just beginning to carry that crisp, invigorating edge that promised winter was coming. Instantly, David and Bella took off running down the sidewalk, their joyful laughter echoing off the brick buildings, a bright, unburdened sound. William and Mary followed at a slower, more leisurely pace, his hand resting protectively on her belly, where the twins were currently engaged in what felt like a vigorous gymnastics competition. Her head settled naturally onto his shoulder, a perfect fit. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting golden pools of light along the tree-lined street, and the setting sun painted everything in breathtaking shades of amber and rose. Mary thought about the long, winding journey that had brought them to this very spot, about the terrified woman she'd been 2 years ago, working herself to exhaustion, consumed by the desperate question of how she'd keep Bella safe and fed, about the cold, isolated man William had been, trapped within a life built on violence and deceit, convinced there was no way to escape without losing everything he held dear. She thought about that fateful night in Luminoso, how David's simple, innocent request to sit with them had set off a chain reaction that had systematically dismantled an empire and, in its place, built a family. How one moment of choosing connection over caution, of reaching out instead of recoiling, had irrevocably changed for lives. "They say you can't outrun your past," Mary said quietly, her voice thoughtful, almost wistful, as she watched their children race ahead, silhouetted against the fiery sunset. "But what they don't tell you is that sometimes love gives you a reason to try, and sometimes that's enough." William pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, his hands playing protectively across her belly, and pressed a tender kiss to the top of her head. "More than enough," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything." David and Bella had stopped at the corner, patiently waiting for their parents to catch up, and as Mary and William reached them, all 4 of them stood there for a moment in the fading golden light, a perfect tableau. Soon to be 6, Mary thought with wonder, her hand joining William's on her belly where their twins kicked and rolled, a vibrant promise of the future. They were no longer a mafia boss and a struggling single mother and 2 lonely, wary children. They were just a family, walking down a tree-lined street at sunset, their shadows stretching long behind them and intertwining on the warm pavement. They were living proof that second chances existed, that redemption was possible, that love could bloom even in the darkest, most barren soil. if you were brave enough, persistent enough, to tend it. William Edward had once built an empire of power and fear, but this ordinary, beautiful, gloriously messy family was the only legacy that truly mattered now. And so their story comes to a close. But really, it's just a beginning. A beginning of cherished morning routines and carefully packed school lunches, of bustling restaurant shifts and patient homework help, of twins who will arrive in 3 months to a delightful chaos and boundless joy, and 2 older siblings eager to teach them everything they know. A beginning of choosing each other every single day, just as Mary had asked William to do. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that people can truly change, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that family is built through choice as much as blood, please let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from, and share your own stories of second chances and unexpected families. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, stories about real human transformation, about courage and redemption, about the quiet, world-altering power of choosing love over fear, these are the stories we'll keep bringing you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, remember, your past doesn't have to define your future. Sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment, one brave choice to change everything. We'll see you in the next story.